Hello, I'm the tax guardian. This is part 8 of why what Senator Mitch McConnell said is wrong. He said we don't have a taxing problem. We don't tax too little. That's false. After reviewing my previous 7 videos, I discovered I made a number of mistakes. This is the reduction of the estate tax here from 70 to 65 to 60 to 55. I said it was a capital gains tax. This dotted line down here is a capital gains tax long term. I also said that Senator Bob Dole's child credit was $500,000. I meant $500. Once I said Mitch McConnell said we don't tax too much. That's wrong. He said we don't tax too little. Now, I messed up in a couple other places, or it could have been clearer, but I want to pick up where I left off at the end of March 2012. The national debt then was $15 trillion, $582 billion. I just checked yesterday, and the national debt now is $17 trillion, $516 billion. Then debt to GDP was 102. Now that's up to 107.5%. That's a huge increase there in just 2 years and 2 months. I added up what the fiscal year budget deficits were for the 5 years that Obama's been president, and they come to $5,865 billion. And that's not the total cost of government. I added up how much the national debt increased during that same period, and it comes to $6,623 billion. That means not all expenses are included in the budget. Now, George Bush practiced that type of accounting deception here for 8 years while he was in office. Obama said he would include the full cost of the Afghanistan and Iraq wars in his budget. But it's still way off. There was $758 billion not in the budget. What is the cause of this explosion of debt other than the recession? Well, there's 2 main causes. Obama's one. Now, why is he to blame? Well, when he was campaigning for president in 2008, he promised he would not raise taxes on 98% of households with an income of less than $250,000, individuals 200,000. That was irresponsible because, well, but why would he say that? Well, of course, to get elected, he'd rather be elected than be truthful. He did promise to raise taxes on the top 2% of households and individuals with incomes above that level. Did he do that? No. In Herbert Hoover raised the top income tax rate from 25 all the way to 63 back in 1932 during the Great Depression. And Roosevelt became president in 1933, and he added a surtax to the Herbert Hoover tax rates, income tax rates. It was called the Revenue Act of 1934. And He also raised the top income tax rate from 63 all the way to 75, 79 including the surtax, and that was called the Revenue Act of 1935. Now these presidents did not wait for economic recovery to raise taxes. Roosevelt needed money for the New Deal, and he did the natural thing, he raised taxes. That was to finance a number of work programs to reduce unemployment and grow the economy. And I checked the figures. From 1931 all the way to World War II, debt to GDP never rose above 45%. Now when Obama took office, debt to GDP was already 70%. There was a huge deficit in 2008, and the government needed tax revenues. And there was no reason not to raise taxes on these individuals and households with these higher incomes. They weren't suffering from a recession, and taxes were at a historical level. Capital gains and dividends were taxed way down at 15%. The highest income tax rate was 35%, and that wasn't taxed on adjusted gross income or gross income. It was taxed on taxable income. That's after all tax deductions, exemptions, and tax credits. They didn't have those during the Great Depression. Now, the second reason that we have this explosion of debt here is that, now this is the number for the 112th Congress right in here. 238 members of the House and 41 members of the Senate. Now these are all Republicans except for 3 Democrats. They signed the Northwest No Tax Increase Pledge, which means they won't raise taxes for any reason. Now that's unconstitutional, because when you enter office, you take a pledge, you take an oath, excuse me, to uphold the Constitution. And the Constitution gives you the power to raise taxes to pay for government expenses. But if you sign the pledge to get funding for your political campaign, that prevents you from exercising your constitutional powers. Now here's a list of legitimate government expenses they refuse to raise taxes to pay for. Well, the 2 big ones is the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. They have added over $2 trillion to the national debt since 2001. Now, both Republicans and Democrats voted for those 2 wars. That is to give George Bush here authorization to use military force. The difference is Republicans, or signers of the Northwest No Tax Increase Pledge, refused to raise taxes to pay for those 2 wars. The Democrats proposed a war surtax. It was called the Sacrifice Act of 2007, blocked by Republicans. Now, the increased cost of Homeland Security since 9/11, signers of the Northwest No Tax Increase Pledge refused to pay for that. Back in 2001 here, we spent $16 billion for Homeland Security. That went up in 2011 was $69 billion. A report came out in 2013 stating that the government spent $791 billion on homeland security since 9/11. Well, since Senators of the Northwest no tax increase pledge refused to pay for that, that's also added to the deficit. Okay. Another expense they refused to pay for? Medicare Part D, prescription drug program for seniors. Now, most Republicans voted for that bill. Most Democrats did not. That was enacted in 2003 to help George Bush get reelected in 2004. That bill had a major problem. It was unfunded. It has added $318 billion to the national debt from 2003 to 2012. Now, another expense they refused to pay for, and that is the negative cash flow in Social Security. That is retirement benefits for seniors. Last year, 2013, it had a $75 billion negative cash flow. Now that is the difference between benefit retirement payouts and incoming payroll revenues. But the Social Security Trust Fund has a paid-in surplus of $2.7 trillion. Now that overpayment in previous periods is supposed to be used to pay for the negative cash flow in the program now. What happened to that money? Well, George Bush here spent a big part of it, $1,369 billion, well, 8 years he was in office. How much is in the trust fund now? Zero. Well, since Senators of the Northwest no tax increase pledge refused to pay for that, that negative cash flow is added to the deficit. Okay, see this line going up here? That's the increased cost of natural disasters. Floods, drought, hurricanes, tornadoes, the rash of forest fires, from climate change or global warming. It's from the period here of 1980 to 2013. Now back here in 1980, we spent about $20 billion a year. That cost has gone up now to $60, $70, $80 billion a year. Congress spent $138 billion on disaster aid from 2011 to 2013. Well, since they Senators of the Northwest no tax increase pledge refused to pay for that, that also is added to the deficit. Now, who is Northwest? Well, he's the founder and president of Americans for Tax Reform. It is a 501c nonprofit, 501c4, excuse me. Now that's not required by law to disclose to the public who its contributors are. But I heard ex-Vice President Al Gore state on TV that that organization is funded 90% by millionaires. So it doesn't represent the majority of people. Now, does that mean time's up?
1 minute.
1 minute. Oh, what happened? The lights went out. What happened?
Oh my God.